Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, I'm Vhirza Darozatun Nahla. I'm from class 1B of English Education Department at Swadaya Gunung Jati University. So in this video, I want to talk about a summarize and analysis of poetry, namely Hope by Emily Dickinson, a prose, namely Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens, and the drama Sorry, Wrong Number. Let's go.
Hope by Emily Dickinson. Hope is a subtle glutton. He feeds upon the fair, and yet, inspected closely, what abstinence is there? His is the halcyon table that never sits but one, and whatsoever is consumed, the same amounts remain.
By Emily Dickinson analysis. So from the poetry I was just read before, what is a subtle glutton? Isn't a glutton by definition really obvious about what he's up to? Or what's the point of being a glutton if your greed is so nuanced that it might not be noticed by others? Gluttons don't care about others. That's what makes them gluttons in the first place. So hope is not a placard standing in for something else. It is the thing itself. So hope is a subtle glutton. The role of consumers and consume shift from the first stanza to second in the first. So in the first hope feeds in the first hope feeds on the fair. This is to say those foolish enough to believe in hope's promise, he eats away at us. We are consumed by hope. Uh, at the word feed and at the word feeds works two ways, and it all hangs on the preposition. We are suffering an illusion. Hope doesn't consume us. Rather, hope feeds us, not feeds on us. Hope gives us food at the halcyon table. It is paradise to be nourished by hope, even though at times it can feel like torture. When hope allows us to want or expect things that are not realized, it may seem as though hope is tearing at our entrails with the sharp teeth of predator. We may blame hope for this agony, but in the end, Emily says we are sustained by hope. Further, that sustenance is endless. No matter how much hope we use up, there is always more where that came from. Emily acknowledges the double-edged sword here that hope both destroy and create. Hard to have a peaceful relationship with hope when disappointment is always lurking in the periphery of hope's influence. Talk about drawing on reserves of hope. We all hope for better. We have all been disappointed. It could only be hope that keeps us here now and for this long and so far. Hope that we will be all right. Hope that nature will be kind, that our lives will settle into some ease and stability, that our city will flourish. Hope eats away at us. As hope feeds on us, still paradoxically it sustains life here. So, and the Hobbes is written by Emily Dickinson. Who is Emily Dickinson? Emily Dickinson was born on 10 December 100, 1830 in Amherst, Massachusetts. She attended Mount Holyoke Female Seminary in South Hadley, but only for 1 year. Her father is Edward Dickinson, was actively involved in state and national politics, serving in Congress for one term. And her brother is Austin, who attended a law school and became an attorney, lived next door with his wife, eh, Susan Gilbert, and Dickinson's younger sister is Lavinia, also live at home, and she and Austin were intellectual companions for Dickinson during her lifetime. Dickinson's poetry was heavily influenced by metaphysical poets of 17th century England, as well as her reading of the Book of Revelation uh, and her upbringing in Puritan New England town, which encouraged a Calvinist, Orthodox, and conservative approach to Christianity. She admired the poetry of Roberts and Elizabeth Barrett, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, as well as John Keats, though she was dissuaded from reading the first of her contemporary Walt Whitman by rumors of its disgracefulness. The two poets are now connected by the distinguished people when held as founders of a uniquely American poet American poetic voice. While Dickinson was extremely pro- prolific as a poet and regularly enclosed poems in letters to friends, she wasn't publicly recognized during her lifetime. The first poem her work was published posthumously in 1890 and the last in 1955, and she died in Amherst in 1886. Upon her death, Dickinson's family discovered 40 hand-bound volumes of nearly 1,800 poems, or or fascicles as they are sometimes called. Dickinson assembled these booklets by folding and sewing 5 or 6 sheets of stationery paper and copying what seemed to be final version of poems. The handwritten poems show Handwritten poems show a variety of dish-like marks of various sizes and directions. Some are even vertical. The poems were initially unbound and published according to the aesthetic of her many early editors, who removed her annotations that the current standard version of her poems replaces her dashes with an endash, which is a closer typographical approximation to her intention. The original order of the poems wasn't restored until 1981, when Ralph W. Franklin used the physical evidence of the paper itself to restore her intended order, relying on smudge marks, needle punctures, and other clues to resembles the packets. Since then, many critics have argued that there is a thematic unity in these small collections, rather than their order being simply chronological or companion. The manuscript books of Emily Dickinson is the only volume that keeps the order intact. Okay, the next one is Oliver Twist's summary. This story begins when a woman who is heavily pregnant is found unconscious in front of a house after giving birth. The mother later died, leaving behind a child who was named Oliver Twist by the nurse. Until the age of 8, he didn't get a decent life. The caretaker of the orphanage, Mr. Bumble, was not a friendly person and never did justice. Long story short, Oliver then fled to London. The hope is that he can make a decent living there. Oliver traveled several dozen miles from where he came from on foot in the winter. On his way, he meets a boy his age. Then Oliver is offered to come with him, who promises a decent life. Oliver feels that luck in is on his side, and he follows the boy to meet Fagin. After meeting Fagin, instead of the appropriateness of life, Oliver is plugged into something criminal, namely, Oliver has to steal in order to get money. On an outing, Oliver witnesses the boys take a handkerchief from Mr. Brownlow, an elderly man, which prompts Oliver to run away in fear and confusion. Confusion. Okay, sorry. The elderly man mistakes Oliver's behaviors for guilt and has him arrested. However, after learning more about Oliver, Mr. Brownlow realizes his mistakes and offers to take care of him at his home. Oliver assumes that uh, he is now rid of Fagin and the pickpockets, but his knowledge of their crimes causes them to seek Oliver out. Nancy, a prostitute and mistress of one of Fagin's men, Bill Sykes, is sent to take Oliver from Mr. Brownlow back to Fagin. She does so successfully, and Oliver is sent on a burglar, burglary mission with another member of the group to the countryside around London. On this errand, Oliver is shot in the arm and then is taken in by the family, the Mayleys, and that he attempted to rob. While he is there, Fagin and a man named Mons plot to get him back. Rose Mayley, while on a trip to London with her family, meets um, uh, meets meets me with Mr. Brownlow to talk with Nancy, who has slipped away from Sykes, to explain the plans made by Moss and Fagin to get Oliver back. She described Moss and tells them when he might most easily be, apprehended, and unfortunately for Nancy, news of her betrayal reaches Sykes and he beats her to death. Sykes accidentally hangs himself soon after. The Mayleys reunite Oliver with Mr. Brownlow, who forces Monks to explain himself. The reader and the reader and Oliver are then informed that Monks is Oliver's half brother that that Oliver is entitled to a large fortune. He receives his he, a large fortune. He receives his share of the money. Fagin is hung, and the Mayleys, Oliver and Mr. Brownlow, move to the countryside where they spend the rest of their days together. And for the characterization of this prose Oliver Twist, there are many characters in there, but I take Oliver Twist, Fagin, Nancy, Rose Maylie, and Mr. Brownlow, Monks, Bill Sykes. So, a characterization of Oliver Twist is Oliver is between 9 and 12 years when the main action of the novel occurs. Though treated with cruelty and surrounded by coldness for most of his life, he is a pious and innocent child. His true identity is the central mystery of the novel. And the second is characterization of Fagin, a confining career criminal. Fagin takes in homeless children and trains them to pick pockets for him. He is also a buyer of other people's stolen goods. He rarely commits crimes himself, preferring to employ others to commit them, and often suffer legal retribution in his place. And the and next is Nancy. Nancy is a young prostitute and one of Fagin's former child pickpockets. Nancy is also Bill Sykes' lover. Her love, her love for Sykes and her sense of moral decency come into conflict when Sykes abuses Oliver. Despite her criminal lifestyle, she is among the noblest characters in the novel. In effect, she gives her life for Oliver when Sykes murders her for replaying Monk's plots. And the next is Rose Maylie. Agnes Rose Maylie is Agnes Fleming's sister, raised by Mrs. Maylie after the death of Rose's fathers. A beautiful Rose Maylie is beautiful, compassionate, and forgiving young woman. Rose is the novel's model of female virtue, and she is established a loving relationship with Oliver even before it's revealed that the two are related. And the next is Mr. Brownlow. Mr. Brownlow is a well-off, erudite gentleman who serves as Oliver's first benefactor. Mr. Brownlow owns a portrait of Agnes Fleming and was engaged to Mr. Oliver's sister when she died. Throughout the novel, he behaves with compassion and common sense and emerges as a natural, natural leader. And the next is Monks. Monks is a sickly, vicious young man, prone to violence, to feed with mm, teeming with inexplicable hatred. With Fagin, he he scams to give Oliver a bad reputation. And the next and last, Bill Sykes, a brutal professional uh, Bugler brought up in Fagin's gang. Sykes is Nancy Pym and lover, and he treats both her and his dog Bull's Eye with an odd combination of cruelty and grudging affection. His murder, his murder of Nancy is the most heinous of the many crimes that occur in the novel. Okay, so Oliver Twist is was written by Charles Dickens. Who is Charles Dickens? Charles Dickens was an English writer and social critic. During his lifetime, his works enjoyed unprecedented popularity. He is now considered a literary genius because he uh, created some of the world's best known fictional characters and is regarded as the greatest novelist of the Victorian era. His novels and short stories enjoy lasting popularity. Dickens was born on 7 February 1812 in Portsmouth on the southern coast of England. His father is John Dickens, was a naval clerk, clerk who dream of becoming rich, and his mother is Elizabeth Barrow, aspired to be a teacher and school director. But the family's financial situation had grown worse because Dickens used to spend money dangerously beyond the family's means. Consequently, John was sent to prison for debt in 1824 when Charles was just 12 years old. And after his father's imprisonment, imprisonment, Charles Dickens left school to work in a factory. Despite his lack of formal education, he edited a weekly journal for 20 years, wrote 15 novels, 5 novellas, hundreds of short stories and non-fiction articles, lectured and performed extensively, was an indefatig- indefatigable letter writer, sorry, and campaigned vigorously for children's rights, education, and other social reforms. Dickens' literary success with began with the 1836 serial publication of the Pickwick Papers. Within a few years, he had become an international literary celebrity, famous for his humor, satire, and keen observation of character and society. His novels, most published in monthly or weekly installments pioneered and the serial publication of narrative fiction, which became the dominant Victorian mode for novel publication. And Charles Dickens died on 9 June 1870 of a stroke. He was buried in Poets' Corner at Westminster Abbey. Thousands of mourners came to pay their respect and at the grave and throw in flowers. Okay, the last one is sorry, wrong number analysis. Sorry, wrong number is a play story about an old woman named Mrs. Stevenson who was difficult to get in call to her husband as she was afraid at home alone because she think she is too old to be alone when she trying to call her husband, she accidentally overhearing a conversation a man named George, who had duty from his boss to kill someone at that night. She trying to call police about murder, but the police didn't believe what Stephenson said. But then at the end of story, Mrs. Stephenson is murdered. The incident starts when Mrs. Stevenson was difficult to connect to his husband's telephone. She knew his husband was busy working late, but the husband's number is always busy when she tried to call him. She then asking help to operator to get in call with her husband. Then we came then we come to rising action. At this stage can be seen when Mrs. Stevenson accidentally overhearing conversation between a killer and his boss. After hearing after hearing this, Mrs. Stevenson feel more afraid, and this can be seen when she says how awful, how unspeakably. Then it gets more complicated when Mrs. Stevenson trying to call her husband back, but it's still difficult to connect. Then she tried to ask for help, calling the police, but if uh, calling the police if there would be a murder around her area of residence. But police didn't believe her, and this can be seen at Lines Sergeant Duffy as a police officer. Yes, ma'am. This is a sign that the conflict is only just begin. A climax can be seen from when Mrs. Stevenson realized that it was she who might be murdered. Then he tried to call the hospital. This can be seen at Mrs. Stevenson. I'm very nervous. I need shooting and company and two. I want a trained nurse. Then there is a sound of someone downstairs at Mrs. Stevenson's kitchen. Then she said, "You got to help me, please. There is someone in this house, someone who's going to murder me." Oh, there is he's coming up the stairs until when the telephone connected to the police, someone picking the telephone then say, "Sorry, wrong number." At this line, we got the resolution. Okay, everyone, that is a summarize and analysis about Hope by Emily Dickinson, about uh, Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens, and the drama Sorry, Wrong Number. That's all for me. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.